KISS is an acronym for Keep It Simple, Stupid, which has been in use for quite some time. In fact, since the 1960s when it was invented in the US Navy, although the concept is way, way older. Actually, Leonardo da Vinci said it brilliantly. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Well, it turns out that KISS is also highly encouraged when programming. It is one of the oldest principles of clean code, and it goes something like this. When writing your code, make your code simple. Avoid unnecessary complexity. If your code is simple, it is easier to read and thus easier to maintain. However, there's a disclaimer that I need to make. There is no hard rule on what is simple code and what is unnecessarily complex code. There are many guidelines and suggestions, but up to some extent, simplicity is in the eye of the beholder, and there may be a fine line between both. Also, please never try to show off using cryptic code. Now, let me show you an example of a piece of code that's unnecessarily complex and how I converted to a simpler and easier to read version. I'll start by opening the KISS class in carvedrock.pl. Remember, I am in the before folder. This is the code as I received it when I joined Carved Rock. The function that I'm going to show you is called getMonth. It receives a number and it returns a string with the month name. For example, 1 is going to be January, 4 is going to be April. But the way in which it was done is a little bit less than ideal. It's using a switch statement. As you can see, this is a lot of typing, and besides being a lot of extra work, it can be a little bit error prone. Also, it only works in English. And at the end, if the number that was provided was not from 1 to 12, the accepted values, a new exception is raised. Somewhere else in the code, I found another function which pretty much does the same thing, just that it was implemented using a string array. Again, this is a lot of extra work, it has its limitations, and it's error prone. Oh, and even worse, I have two functions that do the same thing. It's repeating the functionality, something that I'll talk about when we get to dry. I'll take this first statement, which is the one that checks that the month is in the correct range. I'll copy it and delete the rest of the function. Then I'll go to the first function and add this as the first statement. Why? Because this is the guard clause. It checks for a specific scenario, and if the value is not within an expected range, immediately an exception is thrown. Execution halts, which is what we want. Next up, I'm going to select the old functionality and delete it. And instead, I'm going to use some existing functionality from .NET, in this case, from System.Globalization. If you're not aware, most of the namespaces from Microsoft.star and System.star are part of the VCL, the base class libraries, which is the batteries included functionality of .NET. If you want to learn more about the BCL, there's a course in the library called the BCL Fundamentals, which covers most of the functionality that you need to know to implement and build applications using existing .NET functionality. And now let's take advantage of this functionality from the VCL. Like this, I'm going to be returning a new date-time format info, and from this instance of a class, I'm going to call the getMonthName function, which receives as parameter the month number. And that's it. As easy as this. You are not reinventing the wheel. And even better, by using this function, you get the result in the culture-specific full name of the specified month. This means multi-language. And it's a single line instead of having to write a lot of code. Next up, I clean my code a little bit because I like a good code layout. And something else that I can do at this point, which is recommended for certain functionality, is to create unit tests. This way, I can test this function within my application without having to run the full Carved Rock application. Unit tests is something that I cover in a future module.